in the video today, I wanted to review another channel and provide my feelings, my general disposition towards someone else's ideas and thoughts. I find it to be fruitful and productive to analyze what is being spoken about and discussed, what type of rhetoric exists in the YouTube space. You could call it meta-political or meta-philosophical. All this engagement around ideas in general is fairly interesting, and I think most of you probably agree, hence why you're watching my video or several similar types of videos. Now, I came across this cosmic skeptic, or Alex O'Connor, I think his name is, when I was just doing certain research on online and various sources around the, at this point, a contestation against God. And so I'm not a big atheism guy in terms of engagement, and Reddit and all of these other sources of discussion around the negation of something. I find that to be counterproductive and in contravention of my own productive time. But people do like being negative in that sense. They like to propose the negative and then discuss the negative as if it was a positive and trying to inverse the relationship there. So I think for me, it's certainly a question around, do I find what someone has to say interesting? Is it something that I can resonate with? Are there permutations around what is said and the truth? And then I think following this, why are there so many people who clearly enjoy these type of things? What is it about the messaging and the conveyance of meaning that he's doing that's hitting or striking or resonating with you as well? And so most of these videos tend toward the negative. I never review people I like because I like very few things. I find that there's a certain lack of aplomb, or at least level of earnestness and circumspection around generating ideas and speaking to things. Most people, myself not included, like to talk a lot, but read and maybe receive less. And so I find the reciprocal behavior between input and output to be more important than the output. And as you can see here, these two men are mostly output rather than necessarily input. Once there's a fixed idea in their head, that is the position, and then there's less involvement and you could say curation of certain other ideas that may be counter to those. So it's the holding the exclusive ideal and then shunning the rest. And so I think we'll go into a bit of why I don't find Alex to be very enlightening, even though the way his delivery comes across can be, almost artistic, and he's certainly gifted enough as a speaker or as a debater. But I think this is what's the problem with him and his channel, is that his skill at oration has actually misguided him into thinking that he is an intellectual or intelligent in the sense of the forum or the sphere of ideas, in that rather than just being an interviewer, which is a profession, it's to say I go to someone with something to say and then I interview them. And maybe like firing line with Buckley, you have a certain position you're trying to be the devil's advocate to, and you provide a bit of a soundboard. He comes in with a very specific attack, and so most of his videos and content is designed around this debate. So Alex sees himself clearly as a debater, which is nothing wrong with that. I think debate is a super important and enjoyable pastime, but I think it's also important that if you're debating, then you're sincere, because the point of a debate typically is words rather than violence, but the outcomes should be very similar. It's combat, and the violence, albeit is intellectual, there still should be an element of risk and danger, rather than if I'm there just spouting off non sequiturs or nonsense, then there's no risk to me being wrong because I have no actual sincere beliefs in things. So this is where we get started, and he himself is admittedly acolyte, but a protege in a lot of ways to someone like Christopher Hitchens. His style, his delivery is modeled similar to him, and the way that he goes about confronting certain people and ideas is very reminiscent and redolent of Hitchens. So, which is not necessarily a negative per se, but we'll go into why exactly that's maybe not the most beneficial or at least productive of hallmarks in terms of a debater. Hitchens, I think, was much more of a populist than he was, say, a scathing intelligentsia with rebel, mindset around tearing down, or you could call it maybe. He called himself a polemicist, but I think that the term iconoclast is probably not justified with Hitchens on retrospect, whereas a lot of his opinions were counter to a mainstream, but not edgy in the way that you would consider an iconoclast to be, pushing the Overton window more than just taking the contra of a position. Alex is avid for a position is called the motivism. It's this Humean philosophy of ethics and morality. I've gone over why it's a bit of a bad system. I think there's just not too much Faustian to say about it. It's very rational and logical, and the appeal is necessarily to the calculating machine in your head. If you can tabulate certain things in a certain premise with a prioris or presuppositions, then you can come to the position of I'm right and you're wrong, or I know what's better than what you know is being worse. And so this is why his content hinges on mostly Christianity being, or religion being false. There's this idea that atheism is the position and that naturalism is against this Christianity, this ideal of a God that exists, that we worship, and then because those two things are irreconcilable, then that's what I'm going to base all my content on, all my ideas and my discussions. I don't think that makes for very entertaining reading. Once you've watched 2 videos, you've watched 200, and you start hitting bedrock in terms of, I think, both depth and range of ideas that you encounter. Most religious, particularly Christian, promulgations and exhortations tend toward the same few arguments around why God exists or why the morality, the Christian ethical morality system is the best construct for modern society or whatever they believe. And then he will wade in with his cornucopia of disagreements. And this is where you start to look at argument terminology, and you understand that Alex is actually just pursuing this debate style rather than necessarily arguing for something that he believes in himself necessarily so. So you have a lot of this argument basis around the things he's saying. He tries to frame them in ways that he can set someone up as almost a gotcha. And to say, he knows in his mind that rationalism makes Christianity and religious debaters look a very bit silly. They're relying on something that's not provable. We have this Western idea of empiricism, that you can have a provable hypothesis, a null hypothesis. You can test it. It can be objectively obtained in terms of an answer. And if you can bring that to line, if you can show that to an audience who's also been inculcated with this methodology, which most of the YouTube atheists are appealing to, then you'll see that obviously I'm a very logical, sane person, and then the opposite is someone who's a bit of a child believing in a mystery, fantastical figure. And with my non-belief in phantasms and having a certain belief around science first, or he calls it naturalism or emotivism, Humean ethics, whatever you want to call it. It's just analytical philosophy under a different guise. And analytical philosophy is so reductive that it's actually not a lived philosophy. It's a constructed, it's a prefabricated philosophy. So it's not real in the sense you can live it. It's reflective and deployed as a tool to diagnose things. It's it's a way of thinking rather than as a way of living, which is, I think, deleterious to a spirit. You'll have very few rationalists who are happy people. And then in saying that, you also have a massive misunderstanding of what spirit and soul actually are, because you're denial. You're denying something exists because you don't like the association it has to something else. Say, I also am not a Christian. I'm not a believer in that type of God worship idolatry, but that isn't to say that the idea of a soul and a spirit is nonsensical to me. I still have this idea of it that if you've watched my videos, you know all about. But this is why we can almost, if you watch any of his videos, start to understand his Socratic method. And this is just a way of asking questions to people to get to their fundamental misunderstandings. It's to say you can trip them up, because when people don't have a grounding in what they think, then at some point they're relying on what would be a misconception or some, you could say, illogical mechanism by which they've been irrational. And once you can pinpoint someone's irrationality, you can kind of get them at that, look at me, I'm smart, and then you're the silly one. Bang, that's quite easy to do. And then it's not, I think he probably encounters and engages with the higher level of discourse. And so most of the guests and people he debates are not dumb. But the idea is that you will try to spiritually, or at least temporarily, embarrass someone in front of this audience of rational first. And so this is why it starts to get a bit stale. His whole gimmick is very one-noted, and his inability to have earnest and genuine belief in the spiritual world means everything comes across as soulless and cosmetic, and then ultimately materialist. You can reduce things to rational, you can reduce things to logic, but these are just tools employed to make sure that there's coherence. This has nothing to speak about a metaphysical position. And knowledge and knowing are only important if you're living, and the living is the important part. And this is why idealism is much more fundamental around how it structures a type of metaphysics. It's why Faustian and Gothic belief is the metaphysics of the West, because if you can construct a belief system based off of a collective soul and a spirit that actually has been shown to flourish and exist, then that is the position that you can take. Whereas his is just based on what smart guys have said historically around what they feel and think is, well, if there's a subjective morality, because everything that is good is cheered and everything that is bad is booed, then that's all you really need to consider. And so you will also get in a lot of his content hypotheticals. So there's a lot of discussion around, but what if? And then picture yourself having to deal with this hypothetical moral or ethical situation, which is to say that you can learn a lot from someone who's not capable of actually discussing realities, because all they're conjuring in their mind is situations in which their ethic system applies the best. It's how can I construct within these bounds a system by which I am actually the master because I've got the answer that's right. It's this obsession with the way that things are calculated. And this goes even into more as to the current ethos around nihilistic experience. It's like once you've removed all the soul and expression for things and you can make everything rational to that degree, then there's no spirit to it. It's dead. It's this ossified examination of something. And that's why it's easy to pick on Christians, is because they have become what I would consider not even charlatans, but a bit of a caricature. They're continuing something that we all know is a bit silly because of the traditional legacy of it. You're looking at vestigial practices, and that's why they seem nonsense to us. It's like, yes, someone parading around in a robe, spouting off random catechisms that were wrote down 2,000 years ago is probably a silly way to live your life. Are there messages and meaning in some of the passages? Of course. I mean, humans have not changed fundamentally in 2,000 years to a large degree, but there are specifics around what was written that once you start debating them, you're really just trying to see who's a better arguer, which is, once again, if that is your point, but I think his channel paints much more of a, you should pick atheism over religion or over Christianity in particular. So I'm happy to go over more of that, but I think it starts to become me belaboring the same point over and over, is that he has no earnest and sincere belief. And so when you're a coward, when it comes to positioning yourself positively, all you do is negative. It's always taking the devil advocate position of a moot debate. It's to say, I'm always going to argue in the negative and I can present evidence as to why you're wrong. And then if I'm able to present enough evidence, then I win. But winning is winning in the default position of a negative is fairly easy for anyone who's actually skilled in sophistry or in debate. Where hopefully, and I would say wanting to, if Alex is you're out there, mate, listening and engaging on something positive, give me a metaphysical position of yours that's not emotivism, because that's not real. Something that actually exists from a am I the way that I am in the culture that exists in this realm? Why is it that way? And we can go into Spenglerian meta philosophy here, or just the Faustian belief. We can go very basic with it, but why Faustian metaphysics actually makes sense from a lived perspective, not a analyzed and analytical perspective, which is the basis of, as I said before, looking at things rather than living as or becoming. I think I'll probably just round off to make it a more shorter synopsis of this, is to say that Nietzsche had a wonderful quote here out of Beyond Good and Evil, where the titular phrase comes, "Beyond good and evil, there is a field. I will meet you there." So Alex, this is my ask for you. Let me meet you there.